Welcome, everybody, to the C-Suite Sherpa podcast focused on helping the C-Suite. And we have an excellent guest today, a friend of mine. Dan, tell us a little bit about you, your business, and who you work with.
Well, thanks for having me, Brian. 44 years now, helping the small business owner with their business and financial strategy. We're helping them get their company profitable, healthy, and marketable so that they can actually get to a place of being able to sell the company. And that's becoming a lot harder every day.
And your company name, for those of you who don't know,
It's Dan Mirgon and Associates.
Well, so tell me about who you focus on. What size customer, location, anything specific about that?
On a national level and sometimes into Canada, our clients are the $1 to $10 million range top line revenue, founder, owner, CEO, who built it and really need to understand what it takes. It's a new journey to get to the exit.
Yeah, so what I'm curious what you're finding. We have a huge outflux of owners who are selling businesses, leaving their business, passing it on to families. What are you seeing as far as how prepared are our business owners?
Yeah. First of all, they're not, but let's back up to your first part of your statement. In 1946, the first baby boomer was born. In every year for the last 11 years, about 150,000 of them have turned 65 and said, hey, I want to sell my business. 82% of them don't get sold. So what's happening is the pool of sellers is so big and the bucket or the teacup of buyers is so small. We're thinking about selling our business from 1970s college years thinking. Yeah. So we got to help people, and we do help people think like a buyer and reposition their company so they're optimized and attractive when they actually do end up getting in a conversation with a buyer.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have sold a few companies. When I say fortunate, most of us don't get a chance to do it again. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget the first time I sold a company. It was for way less than what it was worth. I had no idea what buyer's math was. Maybe if you can give us a little insight to the perspective you bring to a seller that is unique, because sellers don't necessarily do the right things intuitively when they're ready to sell. What kind of insight do you bring in terms of the value drivers that a business has to be aware of?
I bring 47 years of starting and running 5 companies, getting them funded, operating them, and selling them. And I know from experience that sometimes the deals don't go the way you want them to.
Yeah.
Part of my job is I get brought in by the business broker or the M&A person or the PE guy, and they've had the disappointing conversation at their end, and they're saying, go talk to Dan because we're going to help you get the profit. When I say profitability, that doesn't mean you're just paying your bills. It means profitability from a buyer's perspective. Right. Most people don't think that way. What does healthy look like? How does that make you more sellable or less sellable if those numbers aren't right? It's kind of like rebuilding the psychology of the owner from a seller to a buyer. Once those lights come on, they start realizing, I've been running this okay, but I have to change how I operate if I want the big reward at the end. As the guy who's been down that path a couple hundred times with people, I get to put my arm around the shoulder and say, okay, this part sucks, but I'm going to go through it with you. And we're going to get there.
Now, if somebody's thinking about selling a business in the next 3 months, probably they waited
a year ago.
They should have called you at least a year ago. What's the ideal scenario? If someone's thinking about selling a business, how soon should they be calling you to help them get set up and do it right?
I get that question a lot. It really depends on the nature of the business, the environment they're in, the health of the other issues. Why are they trying to sell? But we have to sit down and just say, okay, let's turn off all the noise and figure out exactly what you think you have here. Let's prove that, right or wrong, good or bad. And if we come up short, what are you willing to invest to take your typical EBITDA margin or multiple from 3.2 up to 7, which is typically what we're seeing. If you're willing to take a $3 million buyout up to 7 over a 2-year period and earn $4 million, I'm in, right?
Yeah.
If you're just trying to get rid of this because you're burned out, you're not going to pay attention. You're going to have an orderly liquidation someday, and you hope it's orderly.
People say, hey, Dan, I don't plan on exiting the business. And I laugh when I hear that because we're all going to exit at one point in time. It's a question of whether we're doing it
voluntarily or involuntarily.
Go
Most
ahead.
people don't realize that half of the companies that started 10 years ago aren't here because of a death, divorce, disability, or some kind of disaster. Think about that happening to you, and you'll hear, I have a financial planner, I have a wealth advisor. Great. Are you really protected? And how are you building true understanding of the value of the company? Because your CPA is going to give you the bottom line minimized EBITDA number or SDDE number so you don't pay taxes and stay out of jail. That's not what a buyer's looking for. Are you going to give me the ROI based on your profit, performance, and professionalism? If you can't get those three things working, the buyer's going to go, next, there's plenty to look at.
What people are buying, the buyers are purchasing from you is your future, either the potential for revenue or actual revenue that you can produce. Right. And then you get a huge discount for risk. The kinds of things that you would consider strengths, like, hey, I know every one of my clients, I close every one of the deals, nothing happens here without me approving it. From a buyer's perspective, those things are all risk, which means you're probably going to end up going out and working for that buyer to de-risk the transition and get the rest of the money. People don't realize that that's called an earnout. If you didn't like working for your company, ways you were retiring, wait till you have to go to work for the buyer.
Yeah. When you started the company, you had to do that because you didn't have the team, you didn't have the structure, you didn't have the professionalism in the organization, and you were a busy manager. And most of the last 20, 25 years of executive coaching I've been doing is helping those busy managers transition to CEO thinking. And then you got to take the CEO think to end game. What's it going to look like if we do this really, really well, right?
Yeah, I agree. So think about the next 5 years. What do you see as the biggest challenges that the kind of business owners you work with are going to have to deal with over the next 5 years? And then what are you doing to help them stay ahead of the curve?
Well, I don't think the inventory of sellers is going to shrink. In fact, it's going to continue to grow, which is going to put extra pressure on those of us now who own a business who are thinking of our exit transition someday in the near future to really make that gem the sparkling bauble on the private equity table that stands out against everybody else. So that's the main problem that I see. And what we're trying to do with people is help them grieve the fact that it's not what they thought it was 10 years ago, help them deal with reality as it is today, and then re-envision the hope and the excitement of if we actually get you even from 3 to 4 or 5, if we don't hit 7, it's more than you were going to get if you just took the first shark offer that walked in the door. So I ask people all the time, if Elon Musk walked in your business tomorrow and said, I want to buy your company, do you have a number that you can back up with real facts and report so that you can push back for a higher number because you really know what you're worth and why? And nobody is preparing you for that. And that's what we've been doing for years. I just love talking to the guy who says, okay, I've tried all my tricks. I've listened to all the advisors. I need somebody who can actually help me get down to solving the problem. And that's what we love doing.
That's why I asked you to be on the podcast, Dan. I think there are a lot of people out there that could benefit from knowing someone like you. It's a question of whether or not they realize they need help. And that's probably the biggest obstacle, finding someone who realizes that they don't know what they're doing. And they probably only get one shot at doing this. A lot of times they learn valuable lessons.
I really wish there was a me when I sold my investment practice.
Me too.
How many times do you go back and go, dadgummit, if I only knew, right? Now I know, and I'm helping other people. You got to have failure in your life or you're never going to be successful. But
that's right.
If you don't learn from that and help other people prevent it, you're just a peddler.
Absolutely. All right, so let's shift gears for a minute. Let's have a little bit of fun so we can have people get to know Dan, the person. I'm going to ask you some quick questions. There's no wrong answer, just first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready? Here we go. All right, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
I know that because we're both dog lovers. If you can only grab one weapon during the zombie apocalypse, what would it be?
My Glock 45.
There you go. How about your favorite quote or phrase that you think about often?
Never get your great advice from a rookie.
Favorite movie or streaming service? Something that you would call a favorite, or something that you've binge watched recently? Binge watched. Yeah.
Hunt for Red October.
Okay, good. Book that you've recently read that had an impact on you?
Well, I got 1,200 in the library. It's hard to pull one. But I'm going to go back to when I was a very young guy. The one that had the most impact on my life was a book called God Owns My Business by a guy named Stanley Tam.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I like that. So, bucket list item that you've already accomplished.
Got my wife through breast cancer. That was
And
probably the new bucket, and now we're filling it up with other things. So she's doing fine.
speaking of other things, post breast cancer, and that's an awesome story. Bucket list item you haven't accomplished yet, but you know that you will before you're done here.
We've had several plans to go to Banff and ride the steam train over to Vancouver on a 7-day trip. I think that would just be rustic and fun.
That sounds like a great time. Last question, biggest obstacle that you've personally had to overcome, and one great lesson that you learned from it.
I'm not as smart as I used to think I was.
And how did you learn that?
You don't learn that when you're 40. You learn that when you're about to be 70.
And anything that you've had to change as a result of that insight into your intelligence?
Or lack thereof. I've had to learn to let go of the emotional impact of the failure and hang on to the lessons learned from it. Because there's the emotion can keep you from moving forward.
That's funny as we get older, how the more we learn, the more we realize how little we know.
And I thought getting older would take longer, right?
Yeah, but at least the days are going by. So listen, Dan, I really appreciate having you on the podcast, and I'm glad that we had a chance to, at least give some exposure to what you do. So somebody's listening to this and they want to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to reach out and contact you? We'll put all that contact information in the description for the video, but just for now, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
The first thing I always want to do is just talk. I haven't bitten anybody in years. We just need to hear what you're thinking. It's amazing how many times in that conversation we can point to one or two things that can give them some traction. So reach out, either call me on the phone, send me a text, email, visit our website at mirgonconsulting.com. You're going to have all that. But let's schedule a time to talk. It doesn't hurt.
Well, Dan, like I said, if anyone's listening and you're looking for somebody to be the Sherpa on that journey to sell your company, Dan is a great resource. I personally recommend him. I'm just glad to have time today to talk to you, Dan, and appreciate you being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Brian.